Okay, going to be talking jazz today, and if you're a new jazz guitar player who wants to get into the style, I'd say the number one most important thing you should be doing is getting a feel for jazz and for the jazz language by learning as many tunes as possible. And I think that's much more important than theory and exercises and arpeggios and blah blah blah, useful though that stuff can be, of course. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. We're going to be looking at the jazz standard Autumn Leaves, and I'll talk about how I go about learning and memorising tunes, and going to be looking at some simple ways that you can play the chords and melody to that particular tune. And this lesson is actually a bit of a follow-up lesson to a video I did recently on basic jazz chords, and I'm going to be assuming a bit of knowledge of those basic chord shapes. So if you haven't seen that video, or if you want to refresh your memory, then I'll put a link to that on screen right now. Autumn Leaves is often recommended as a good first jazz tune to learn, and that's for good reason. I think it's a must-know tune which is actually pretty beginner friendly, and importantly it contains a lot of really important jazz language, the kind of building blocks of jazz harmony, which is going to set you up to learn dozens of other similar tunes. And if you've decided to learn this tune, or any other tune for that matter, your first thought might be to reach for the sheet music, maybe the real book, or perhaps check out what your favourite YouTube guitar instructor has to say about it. And I remember when I first started learning jazz guitar, I'd been playing for a little while. I thought it might be fun to learn a little bit of jazz, but I wasn't at that point really a jazz fan, and I had no understanding or feel for the music. I just went out and got a real book and tried to learn a few tunes, and I found it really hard. So rather than just reaching for the sheet music straight away, my top recommendation is to do some listening and to get a feel for the music. And I think the reason that a lot of people find jazz hard these days is people don't listen to it and they don't have a feel for it. You've got to remember that jazz was the popular music of its day, and people would know the lyrics, they'd know the melodies, and these tunes would be on the radio and in films. So I want you to check out some recordings, and these days, of course, it's easier than ever to do that. You can just get on Spotify or whatever your favourite way of consuming music happens to be. And with Autumn Leaves, it's a hugely popular song. There are going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of versions of this tune. You can just listen to a few of those versions and soak up the song and get a feel for it. So that's what I've been doing just now. I've got my laptop down here, did a search for Autumn Leaves. And when you're doing this, I'd recommend you're looking out for certain versions of the tune. I think first thing I might do is find a version of the tune with vocals that makes it very clear what the lyrics are, what the melody is. I mean, sometimes with jazz, people will kind of reinvent and reharmonize, and it kind of obscures the the original harmony and melody of the tune, and that's fine if you know the tune well already. But if you don't know the tune, you want kind of quite a basic version of it. So here I've just got a nice Frank Sinatra vocal version of it. That's often a good place to start. Frank Sinatra, he sings the melody in a very straight, kind of clear way. The harmony's nice and clear. Another version I've got here is the French language version, and that's interesting to check out. I think originally this song was sung in French, so there's a version here by Yves Montand, and so a couple of nice vocal versions there. Then you can check out maybe what some of the jazz greats have done with this tune. And I think the classic recording of Autumn Leaves is the one by Cannonball Adderley on the Something Else album. Absolutely essential jazz listening, this record, I think. And it's the opening track on that album. It's got Miles Davis on it playing the melody, and that's really well worth a listen. And then since we're guitar players, I'd recommend finding some guitar versions of this tune, see what the options are on the guitar. And here on my playlist I've got a great version by Joe Pass, and then I also found this, which I'd not heard before, but it's a live recording by Herb Ellis, Barney Kessel and Charlie Bird, I think, which is an interesting listen. So those are my listening recommendations. So it pays to be quite focused in your listening, so try and find an early recording, preferably with lyrics, with vocals on it. Then listen to a jazz classic, and often with this stuff there are kind of agreed upon sort of classic versions of these tunes, and then maybe find what some guitar players have done with these tunes. Let's get a bit more practical and hands-on then, actually learn this tune. And what does it mean to learn a jazz tune? I think there are three things you should be learning here. You want the chord progression, and then you want to be able to play the melody, And then I think you want to be able to just do some basic soloing or improvisation over those chords. And the most important thing for me is to actually have it memorized. You don't want to be reliant on the real book or the sheet music. You actually want to internalize the melody and the harmony of this tune and any other jazz tune that you learn. So I've got my real book down here, and this is what Autumn Leaves looks like. And yeah, I do think as a beginner you want to just get hold of the music, get hold of a real book. I know that some jazz musicians might be a little bit snobby towards the real book, and you don't want to become overly reliant upon that. But as a beginner, you can't just sit down and learn this stuff by ear very easily, or at least it's very challenging. So I think in the beginning there's no shame in learning it from a real book, and then as you develop as a jazz musician, yes, you might well try figuring this stuff out on your own. But let's just get an overall feel for the tune and the form then. So I'm going to be doing this in the key of E minor. I think it can be played in different keys, this tune, but certainly E minor is quite a common key for this one. That's the key that it's in the real book. And maybe start by just getting a feel for the form of this tune. We've got 32 bars, and we've really got 3 different sections, and I think you describe this tune as an A-A-B-C form. So it starts off with 8 bars, which is the A section. That's then repeated. There's a slightly different ending the second time round. Then we've got some new material. We've got a B section, and then we've got a final section, which is again kind of new material to the tune, or a slight variation on what we've had before. So we're going to call that the C section. So A, A, B, C is the form. And if you look at the first 3 bars of this tune, we've got A minor 7, D7, G major 7. Would you believe it? It's 8-2-5-1, the most common chord pattern in jazz, I think. It's important here to know the chords that belong to the key. So here we're talking about the key of E minor or G major, really the same thing. E minor is the relative minor to the key of G major. So that the chords, just a quick recap for those of you who don't know this, the chords in the key of G major, we've got G major 7 is the 1, 2 is A minor 7, 3 is B minor 7, 4 is G major 7, the 5 is D7, D dominant 7, the 6 is E minor 7, and then we've got the 7 chord, which is F sharp minor 7 flat 5, and then we're back to G major 7 again. The chords in the key of E minor, really the same chords, but you can think about them in a different order. So you'd be thinking about the E minor as the 1 chord, but really it's the same thing. I'm thinking in the same kind of a way. And here we've got our major 2-5-1. Often a good signifier of a 2-5-1 is the dominant 7th chord. Here we've got a D7, and more often than not a dominant 7th chord is going to be functioning, so it's going towards its 1 chord. So here the D7 is pulling our ear towards the G major 7, so G, A, B, C, D. So D is the 5 chord going to 1, and we're preceding that 5 chord by the 2 chord, which is A minor 7. So 2, 5, 1. Really important you're familiar with that. I'm just plugging in our beginners jazz chord voicings here. So 6-string root, minor 7 shape, moving to this C grip, 5th string root, dominant 7th chord, D dominant 7, then going to our 6-string root, G major 7 chord. So really it's a block of harmony here. I'm not even thinking about those individual chords. It's just a 2-5-1 heading towards G major 7, and it's really just in the muscle memory there. And next we're heading to a C major 7 chord, and this is in the key. This is actually the 4 chord. So we've got 2, 5, 1, 4 in G major, but then we're going here. We've got a slight shift in mood here. We're actually heading to the minor key now. So this is a 2-5-1 in E minor. So we're pointing to an E minor 7 chord. We're preceding that by its 2 chord. And in a minor 2-5-1, the 2 chord is a minor 7 flat 5 shape. Then we've got the 5 chord. And often you're going to make the 5 chord in a minor key a dominant 7th chord. It's just got a greater pull to the 1 chord. So this is a B7 going to an E minor 7. So that's our minor 2-5-1. couple of bars on that E minor 7. That's our first A section, and then that is just repeated, which leads us to the B section. And the way I think about the B section is it reverses the harmony of the A section. So we're starting with a minor 2-5-1 instead of a major 2-5-1. So we've got this, and then we're heading to the major 2-5-1 again. That's our B section. Then we've got the C section, and that starts off with the minor 2-5-1, and then we hit the E minor 7 chord and we've got this. So a series of 2-5s, and a few ways you can think about this, a couple of bars in the tune. You don't need to overthink it or get too theoretical. Really, it's just a pair of 2-5s here, so E minor 7 to A7, D minor 7 to G7, really just going round the circle of fifths, or the circle of fourths, however you want to think about it. We're going down in fifths or up in fourths, and the purpose of this is really just to connect us back to this minor 2-5-1 to end the tune. So we've got this descending pattern, and then the last few bars, the minor 2-5-1 once again. So important to have these 2-5-1 blocks memorized and in the muscle memory, so it's just completely automatic. So we've got the major 2-5-1 and the minor 2-5-1, and I suggest you learn these in a couple of different places as well. This is stuff that I went into in the previous video, but it's so important that I just want to emphasize it once again. So we've got the major 2-5-1, if we're doing it in the key of G, A minor 7, D7, G major 7. It's just a block of harmony right there under the fingers. So I can do it there, leading to this 6-string root major 7th chord, or I can do it up here. So same chords, but we're starting on the 5th string root and then ending up on this G major 7 chord. Same thing with the minor 2-5-1. So you can start on the 5th string root. So that's F sharp minor 7 flat 5, B7, E minor 7, 5th string root, and you can do the same thing in a different part of the fretboard by starting on a 6th string root. So F sharp minor 7 flat 5, B7, and then E minor 7 like that. In this particular key, it's down in the open position. You can use some open strings. If you didn't want to do that, you could play it higher up the neck without using open strings. So those are our 2-5-1 blocks. It's so important just to practice those until they become completely automatic, and then you can just plug them into tunes like Autumn Leaves. So it's important to try and get this memorized as soon as possible, I think. And for a beginner, this can seem pretty daunting. I mean, how am I possibly going to manage to memorize all of these complex jazz chord changes? But if you're thinking in terms of these bigger structures, these building blocks that I've been talking about, and if you understand how the tune is put together, how these things connect, it's actually pretty easy to memorize this and much more complicated jazz tunes than this. So that's how I'm thinking. I'm not really thinking about all of the individual chords here. I'm thinking about these bigger structures and then seeing how they connect together. So with this one, I'm thinking, okay, we're starting with a major 2-5-1, then we've just got the 4 chord in there as well. Then we're heading to the minor key, to the key of E minor, with a minor 2-5-1. So we've got this. And how do those two blocks fit together? The major 2-5-1 and the minor 2-5-1 block. You might like to try and memorize your major keys and relative minors. That's certainly worth doing. But also on the fretboard, there's a relationship here. So if you've got your major key here, G major, then the root of the relative minor key is going to be 3 frets lower, is E minor. So G major and E minor. Also, if you're heading to a minor 2-5-1, the root of the 2 is just going to be 1 fret below the root of the 1 in the major key. So if we're in the key of G major heading to the relative minor, you can just think down 1 fret and then 2-5-1 to the minor key. That kind of helps you make these connections and get your bearings. Also with this particular tune, we're on C major 7. The next chord is going to be F sharp minor 7 flat 5, and the relationship there is a tritone away. So you can find that F sharp from a C, and that gives you the root of the next chord. So however you want to think about it, it's important you can see the connection between those two building blocks. Then the B section is easy. It's the same building blocks but in a different order. Minor 2 5 1, and then the major 2 5 1, and then for the final section again it's easy. It's the minor 2 5 1, and then as soon as you hit that one chord, then you go into the circle of fifths thing, 2 5 2 5, and then from here we're on the G7. I'm thinking down 1 fret to the minor 7 flat 5. You can play that up here if you wanted to, 2 5, and back home to E minor again. So that's how I'm thinking about this tune. That's how I can memorize this tune. I'm not thinking about all these individual chords, but just these big 2 5 1 blocks, and then knowing the order in which those blocks occur and being able to hear and see the relationships between them. Let's put all of this together then, and I'll just play through a nice basic version of this tune. I'm just going to use our beginners jazz chords here. I think that provides a really good starting point. You can obviously make things more complicated when you're confident with that. Likewise with rhythm, I'm just going to play a consistent Charleston rhythm. Obviously you can make it more interesting, less predictable once you're feeling ready to do that, but this is how I would start with this tune. So major 2 5 1, we've got the 4 heading to minor, you can throw in a dominant 7 there if you want. Major 2 5 1 again, which is the A section repeated, 4. Then we're heading to the B section, minor 2 5 1. Major. Then we've got minor 2 5 1, and then our descending 2 5s, and then minor 2 5 1 to finish. And I strongly recommend you think in these terms when learning tunes. Not only does it make these things easy to remember, but another advantage of this is it makes things easy to transpose and to play in different keys. And Autumn Leaves is quite often played in different keys, but it's very easy if you're just thinking in terms of 2 5 1s and how they're connecting together. Really the actual key doesn't matter. So if, for example, I wanted to play this one in B flat major G minor, which is very commonly played in, I'm thinking in exactly the same terms. So I'd be thinking 2 5 1 in the major key, which in this case is B flat major. Then I've got the 4 chord, and I'm heading to the minor key, so I'm thinking about 3 frets down from B flat, or I'm thinking also about this tritone relationship between the 4 chord and then the root of the 2. I've got the minor 2 5 1, and then that goes round again. Then we're just flipping the order of those 2 5s for the C section, so minor, going to major, then minor again. Then we've got that series of 2 5s happening here, so from G with G minor this time as the starting point. I might just skip up the fretboard to give myself a little bit more room, but we just got 2 5, then that's just slipping down 1 fret for the final minor 2 5 1. So no big deal to play this one in a completely different key if you're thinking in terms of these building blocks and how they connect together. And that, I think, is a solid beginner version of this tune. If you wanted to get a little bit more advanced, I'm still thinking in terms of these chord shapes as my starting point, but I might embellish a little bit more, and very often I will leave out the root note and just play voicings on strings 2, 3 and 4, and then you can play these quite simple shapes. It's quite easy to maneuver between these shapes and also to add in additional notes, additional colours, so extensions and alterations and that kind of thing. And then you've got something that's a little bit more sophisticated, so that's something you might work your way towards. So if I just sort of demonstrate a slightly more advanced way of comping through this tune, it might sound something like this. So we'd have so getting a little bit fancier there, but just playing on strings 2, 3 and 4, and mostly thinking in terms of just the top part of these beginners jazz voicing. So if I just leave out the root, you've got 2, 5 and 1 just played on those 3 strings. So that's something to experiment with if you're a little bit further along, if you're not a total beginner and starting to get into some more advanced stuff. So you've got your chords down, you understand how this tune works, you're able to play it in a different key if necessary. Next step in learning this one is going to be to get the melody down. So lots of ways to play the melody on the guitar. I'm just going to show you the way that I like to do it. And when you're learning the melody, again, you can refer to the sheet music, the real book, if you want to. No shame in doing that. But with this particular tune, it is quite easy to pick out this melody by ear. It's very strong, so maybe listen to a vocal version of the tune and see if you can pick out these notes by ear. But we've got our opening phrase, which goes like that. We're starting with some pickup notes actually, so it's 2, 3, 4 or 1. And I'm thinking in terms of the notes in the key of G major, E minor here. You might like to think about your sort of scale shapes here. So G major in this position, or E minor, it's really the same thing. We're starting on an E, going up the scale, and then we've got an interval skip. We're going from a G to a C, so we've got scale steps and then a skip of a fourth, and that's really the way that this melody is constructed. It's kind of a sequence. We're then just doing the same thing but descending down the scale. So we've got this, and then we've got this. So the same thing, but we're just starting from a D, going up the scale, and then we've got a skip. So you could play that here, and then it really makes obvious this descending pattern. I'm playing then from D, and we can go down again. Same thing, and then go down once again. And you've got to make some small adjustments to this shape to make sure that the notes remain in the key, but it's really just the same thing descending. So that's our first A section. We repeat that. So slight variation on the second time through. And then the C section of the tune, we're climbing back up again. This is kind of the structure of the tune. It's kind of going down in the A section and then going back up again in the B section. So we could play the B section like this. So I'm climbing up the B string there mainly. I've got some bigger interval skips here, so an octave there. And then the last bit. Playing that bit in position here. So that's just one way you could lay out the melody on the guitar. You don't have to do it like that, but I kind of like the logic of this. We've got that descending sequence, and then we're working our way up the fretboard in the C section, returning to our home position here. So give it a go my way, but you can experiment with some other options too. So I'm going to finish by putting the melody together with the chord progression, and this is certainly something that you want to practice. What I've done is just record the chords into a looper, and then I'm going to play the melody over the top, which is something that I recommend you do. Then you've got some practice with the chords, and then you've got a little backing track over which you can play the melody, and then eventually you can get into improvising as well. So I'm just going to play the melody very simply. You know, jazz musicians do like to embellish the melody, and that's certainly something that you can do. But to begin with, I think just state the melody very clearly, and a lot of my favourite jazz musicians will do that. So, you know, listen to Miles Davis. He's making the melody very simple and clear. You know, someone like Chet Baker when he plays this tune. I do like that simple approach. So I think I'm going to leave it there for this video. You've got the chords, you've got those memorized, you've now got a melody as well. I suggest you work on those two things, really get them internalized, memorized. Then the next step is going to be working on soloing and improvising over those chord changes. I think I'm going to save that for another video. I think that deserves an entire video to itself, so I'm going to try and do that reasonably soon. But hope you enjoyed this video. As usual, tab is going to be up on my Patreon page. Thanks a lot for watching. See you next time.